You're tuned in to the MtG Cable cast, where they cover Magic, the Gathering Finance. All right? You don't know about it? You're tuned in right now and get ready to learn some shit. Buckle your seat belts and light a blunt and get ready for the MtG Cable cast. Starring Reptar and Thirsty, them onion head motherfuckers.
All right, I'm going to start with a green shell. Nah, probably a red. I'm not in first place yet. Alrighty, guys. Welcome to the newest episode of the Cabal cast, coming to you live from Flooded Strand. Because, much like Mario Kart, this episode's going to cover an entire joke, which was the Q3 Hasbro earnings call.
Yes.
How Wizards of the Coast impacted it, how Hasbro is impacting Wizards of the Coast, and vice versa. Mm-hmm. So, without further ado, we'll get the shells shooting and get started.
Right. So, again, Star City, Ben Bleiweiss, and Nick Miller did a really good write-up of the investor article, and we will be linking both of those in the show notes. And the initial highlight we want to talk about is what they key on very acutely, first off, and it is the third quarter 2020 finance results. It's the image that you see at the top of the screen right now. And basically the important part of this table is that revenue is down 15% year over year, and there is a 40% decline in operational profits. Now, this has on the whole, this is not WotC, so we're just looking at like the big picture here, right? This is where we are. This is where a lot of that spin out came from to continue the Mario Kart punnage about people discussing what is going on with Has and how they can expect growth at the numbers that they quoted.
Yeah, and I think the important thing here is, and this is something we'll touch on in our next episode actually, is that Hasbro's overarching issues, whatever you want to call it, their overarching philosophy does impact Wizards of the Coast a lot. Mm-hmm. What's going on at that company, and this is something we exemplified previously in our last earnings call episode, like the overall health of Hasbro directly impacts the quality of the product that Wizards of the Coast delivers. Yep. And when it's treated as like a cash cow, Alt Fox, thank you very much, things kind of hit a kink. Mm-hmm. And this call was very interesting because we kind of saw under the hood for one of the first times of like not just the common narrative of what Hasbro has been telling us about Wizards of the Coast and how it works. We got to peel back a little and see what's actually going on here, because there were a lot of things they touched on as like reasons for the overall decline, some of which directly impact Wizards of the Coast and are directly impacted by Wizards of the Coast. Mm-hmm. So it's a, like, again, this is something we harped on in the last episode. Like, these calls are actually very important because at the end of the day, Wizards of the Coast is a business. Hasbro is a business. They are going to do whatever makes them the most possible amount of money in the short term because that's way more appealing than long-term cash. General philosophy, that's just how it is.
Yep. This is also kind of a unique year for Hasbro on the whole anyway, where they bought at least one game studio. And
yeah, one or two, I think.
That's for at least for Moto, right? They bought that, or they bought something for a digital.
They licensed out. They bought a game company that helped release whatever that awful Dungeons and Dragons game was with Drizzt.
Yes. Yeah.
That game was trash.
Yeah.
But I digress.
So they bought at least one game company, and they picked up a number of other interesting tech pieces this year. So there's also a lot of fudging of those numbers because they're associated properties with various licenses and various slices of WotC. A lot of that tech, obviously, not WotC, sorry, Hasbro, but a lot of those do get sliced up under WotC because that's where a lot of that tech is focusing. This isn't like the movie studio where they made some number of terrible G.I. Joe movies. 3 of them, maybe? Look, things went really well when they decided to kill everyone besides Channing Tatum, I think, and then bring in Bruce Willis, maybe The Rock. I don't know. That's how you save a franchise.
Yeah, that's the Expendables would.
Yeah,
like to
exactly.
agree. It's all about family, guys. We're the Fast and the Furious Wizards of the Coast.
It's the greatest magic you'll ever know. Now, immediately after that first image, there is another table that basically goes over segment performance, and this dives in a little deeper. We see WotC compared to other products, and we begin seeing EBITDA data. And again, EBITDA stands for earnings before interest, taxes, and amortizations, and it's a measure of a company's profitability that is mainly used by investors, and it is helpful for the comparison of one company to another in the same line of business, so pitting Hasbro against Mattel, and it can provide a more accurate view of a company's real performance over time.
Yeah.
So we're looking at these EBITDA tables now, and we can see pretty clearly WotC is positive by about 102 million in Q3 2022. That was all the way on the right hand side of the table, and it's down 36% compared to Q3 2021. And there were a number of reasons cited for this that come up in a little bit.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things too here is, and this is in the financial release link that we'll have, if you take a deep dive into that and you actually look at it, the third quarter disparities are much more stark than the year-to-date disparities.
Yes.
And I think that has to do primarily with release schedule. And hear me out on this. Last year, we had a slower release schedule. This year, very accelerated. So for better or worse, more products means more sales. And that's kind of helped them year-to-date catch up, even if the quarterly report is horrifying compared to what it looks like.
Right. So there's a very quick snippet in the Star City article if you want to get these next bunch of bullet points and our rantings distilled. And they come shortly after the EBITDA table. And when you look at the Wizards of the Coast and digital gaming segment, you see that the revenues decreased 16%. And these are the bullet points that Hasbro gave their investors on the call. Revenues decreased 13%, excluding a negative 8.7 million impact of foreign exchange. Okay, so sure.
Yeah.
We are just down 13%, and that is without the economic issue that we're seeing that changes currency exchange.
Yeah.
Sure. Right. Operating profit of 1.2 million was down 36%, which we just talked about. You can see that clearly in the EBITDA table, and reflects the lower revenue, higher product costs, incremental royalty expense with new Universes Beyond card set releases, amortization from the acquisition of the D&D Beyond, and continued higher investment in development. And these declines were partially offset by launch-related product development, advertising, and depreciation costs associated with Dark Alliance that released in early third quarter 2021. So you mentioned up top that we're seeing licensing fees essentially used as, I don't want to say an excuse, but finally a line item to point to a drop in profits. We didn't see that previously. I honestly forgot that, we had to license Godzilla from Toho, but we absolutely did, and that wasn't called out for Ikoria. And you rightly,
or the Secret Lair.
Yeah, and you rightly mentioned that it's not like the Lord of the Rings IP is a cheap license from the Tolkien estate.
Yeah, Doctor Who is not a cheap license.
From the BBC, no.
And Transformers is, because guess who owns the license? Your company. It's just, this one is one of the most damning things, because to me, this is something that investors can look at and say, look at our earnings before these products. Look at what our earnings now with these products compared to what they were without. Are we getting a better return on our investment? Excuse me, if we don't spend the money on these licensing fees, if we don't do this Universes Beyond product. And I think that is something, and this is when I mentioned, you're getting a little bit of a look under the hood that we haven't had before. They've never really mentioned anything like this because, one, it hasn't existed. And two, they've never mentioned the acquisition of a platform like D&D Beyond, which for those of you that don't know is basically a distribution platform for modules for D&D, often user created. Wizards of the Coast used to partner with them to help release content. They recently purchased them. So that's another thing that I think may give kind of those Altifox-minded people some sort of credence to maybe we should spin this off, because if you were working fine with this platform before and now you're paying for this platform and it's not giving us a return on our investment, do we really want like Hasbro running the ship here?
Mm-hmm.
Or do we just want to be our own thing?
Yeah.
Because again, hit them in the pocketbook. That's where it matters. That's where they'll notice. And this was the CEO saying, yes, our planning hit us in the pocketbook. We don't know if it's going to pay off or not because our earnings are down from what they were the year before.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, the other thing I find interesting is that the mention of these declines were partially offset by launch-related product development, advertising, and depreciation costs associated with it doesn't matter what. And I'm curious if they are finally in a spot now where, honing in a little more, these declines were partially offset by product development. There is a way to do engineering work, software development essentially, and do it in such a way that it's a tax write-off, and I wonder if they just finally figured that out because they brought in an actual development studio.
Yeah. Nah, we never knew before. It's fine. What?
Yeah. You know, so that's just one of those things that kind of keys into something relevant to me, and I don't think I would have noticed that otherwise had I not known that that is actually a possibility. But I don't understand the part where they mention advertising, because advertising is always a negative line item, and
yeah.
The easiest place to see that is in the entertainment industry, which Hasbro is tangentially related thanks to the brand Blueprint. And basically, when you think about a theatrical release movie, it's the easiest example. Whatever the budget is, the movie costs twice as much to make because they spend that same amount almost exactly on advertising. So when you go to look to see if a movie is profitable, you have to look at the cost that it took to make the movie, the overall budget, multiply that by 2, and then check the box office earnings. And only after you break past budget X2 are you profitable.
Yeah.
And so I don't know how you offset with advertising when it is mainly just a black hole. That is meant to make you money, so maybe they're doing some better analytics works, and they're seeing that
could be, yeah.
certain bits of advertising are finally actually beginning to pan out, and they can see that in their data sets, and that's cool. But yeah, other than that, the royalty thing is kind of interesting, especially finding out that M30 might not have cost them anything because they didn't do any kind of legwork. And so,
or pay the artist to use their art.
That could be a line item next year.
Yeah. Lawsuit settlements.
Yeah. So that's an interesting thing. And then the last bullet point here for this drop in revenue is for the full year, on a constant currency basis, we expect high single-digit revenue growth behind a strong Magic the Gathering tabletop release schedule for the fourth quarter. So we know that's Brothers War. That is Brothers War Commander. That is Dominaria Remastered.
Yeah.
And I think, is there a Dom Remastered Commander set?
I think there is.
Just verifying. Brothers War Commander. Oh, Jumpstart is in there.
Oh my god.
Oh, Dom Remastered. I'm sorry, that's January 2023.
Oh, yes, it is.
Starter
yep.
Commander decks. Pioneer Challenge decks. And that's really about it. They can try and fudge the numbers with the Secret Layers stuff, the Extra Life, and the Countdown Kit, but those closed last week. They did sell out of Secret Layer 30 kits, and the Extra Life one closed kind of unceremoniously.
Yeah.
But
and there was one other thing that Cox mentioned during the call, which I want to harp on for a second. And that's that part of it is high levels of inventory.
Mm-hmm.
What? Well, sell it to the LGS if it's Wizards of the Coast stuff. Stop making shitty toys that nobody wants. I don't understand. if you're undercutting the LGS, and this to me harkens back to something you and I have mentioned, and that's that it doesn't seem that the people who came over from Hasbro understand the position of an LGS in the ecosystem. And the reason being that there are a lot of people that just walk into stores and just, oh, I'm going to buy a box.
I'm going to buy this.
It actually happens. You know what they don't do? They don't sit in their basement or sit in their house watching football, watching the news, watching whatever disappointing episode of Game of Thrones they're on season 8, and think, man, I would really love to buy a box of Magic cards right now.
Mm-hmm.
If you give those to the LGS for an affordable price, they can move.
Yes.
That's all I wanted to say. I hate it.
Yeah. It's not like there's a lot of product that they release at the beginning and the middle of the year that's just rotting, unless for whatever reason Double Feature didn't sell as well as they expected it to, and it's rotting there. New Capenna, maybe. Neo was a banger, right? That was this year. As like all that product was great. Maybe there is some weird Commander product that just didn't move, and like that's my hope, is just that there is some rancid product maybe that just didn't move, and so now they're stuck with it. But that's also a lesson. If you don't just fire hose product, you can make better product.
Sure can.
By spending more time in the development phase, and it all works out well for you. Now, the last part of this is that this conversation is, so this all happens early in October, like the 4th, and that's when this call is. The breakout that we're looking at from Hasbro came out on the 18th. Star City keyed in pretty shortly there as well, around the same time. However, when this call was happening live, WotC was also making announcements on behalf of Magic 30 that just happened in Vegas, and the paired event in Philadelphia that some people are saying has quietly lost the Magic 30 title, and it is no longer being listed as an anniversary event. So we'll TBD on what exactly is going to go on in Philly. I mean, you lose a World Series to the Astros, and maybe people just strip you of everything. Now,
what a disaster that was. Terrible for baseball. Oh, I digress.
Now, Hasbro stock during this call saw a rise and it saw a fall, and it was purely serendipitous to what was going on with WotC. The M30 announcement had nothing to do with either one of these. It was literally what was going on the call. What investors could see, because apparently Hasbro also decided to black out the stream purposefully.
Yeah.
Now, that was a good one.
Let's obfuscate our data, because that doesn't seem sketchy at all.
Yeah.
You fucking morons.
So I'm just going to verbatim 2 paragraphs in part of this discussion. The first is from the Motley Fool article. In addition to discussing the new quote-unquote gathering convention for Magic fans in Las Vegas, M30, progress on playtesting the company's new quote 1 D&D edition of Dungeons & Dragons, bundling hard copy and online versions of the quote-unquote Dragonlance game, and previewing new Dungeons & Dragons movies and television shows, Hasbro's laid out some numbers for the company as a whole. Now, the majority of that I don't understand, because it's all D&D related. I don't know what 1 D&D is, and I don't know what Dragonlance is. What I care about is the fact that they cite the Dungeons & Dragons movies and television shows, but there's no mention of the Magic the Gathering show that they've been working on Netflix. Maybe or maybe not. That wasn't a line item during the call. That wasn't a line item like fudged anywhere else in this budget, unless it's somewhere deep inside that movie studio and we just don't know. So to me, that's interesting.
Yeah, that's really telling. The other one I also like is they, and this is important. So currently, Hasbro shares are selling for 17 times the earnings valuation. Yet again, the C-level executives have not purchased any more Hasbro stock, which is something that AltaFox harped on, as you can see in our episode. Free cash flow at the company remains weak. Less than half of the company's income over the last 12 months is like actual cash on hand. And they have $3.5 billion in debt, more than cash on hand, which includes the software studio they just sold before they finished paying it off. These are not good decisions.
Nope.
They're just not.
And that combined with the announcement of Brand Blueprint 2.0 and the promise of continued revenue growth is what tanked the stock during that call. So, the other direct quote. In particular, over the next several years, Hasbro will target mid-single-digit sales growth on average, culminating in annual sales of $8.5 billion in 2027, about a $2 billion improvement in 5 years. And mid-single-digit sales growth, you think 5 to 7, and like that's not terrible. That is approachable. They have lost some important brands, like we discussed last year. They lost the Disney Princess line, which includes Frozen and all the other cash cows that come with it. So they are going to have to figure out what to do with this. In the investor call, they do cite the My Little Pony movie they released in 2021 as a large area of profit for that division, and why that is so far behind. They can almost see a 1-to-1 correlation in those numbers. So, sure. Continuing on. At the same time as the company is growing sales, it will be cutting costs as much as $250 million to $300 million annually by 2025. Helping with this, Hasbro aims to exit any of its franchises that are currently unprofitable and trim unprofitable product items. This last bit is actually a little interesting and kind of scary to me. If you go back to our episode about AltaFox, we touch on a couple of things of interest. And if you read through the documentation, AltaFox is very clear to call out all the divisions that are unprofitable and the IPs. One of them is still the Power Rangers. I don't think that IP is making any money despite the continued dumping of figures that they do. One of the big things at Hasbro PulseCon was the make your own, and you can make your own Star Wars figure, Power Rangers figure, Ghostbusters figure. There's the Power Rangers Lightning series, which I have bookmarked because when they release that Green Ranger helmet and dagger, I will buy them. But I don't pay them millions for this.
Yeah.
So that IP is still tanking. I do not know what this company is going to look like in 3 years, 2.5 years, when they're done shedding all these unprofitable IPs and elements. It's just going to be, I'd imagine, the basic toy lines that we know, a handful of board games, because apparently everybody needs a copy of Monopoly before they realize it's ass.
Yeah,
and then Hasbro, and then Magic. Well, not Magic, WotC, because D&D is still profitable, and some of the other odds and ends they make. What is this company going to be when they're done with this?
It's going to be fascinating to see, because I don't know how profitable Transformers is. Are they even still making movies? I have no idea at this point if there have been any movies recently, but I feel like it hasn't been relevant for a decade.
No, the original cartoon continues to remain relevant because there's always a gem somewhere. And the last thing that I saw was a jazz musician break down the themes from a musical theory standpoint, and it's ridiculous. It is a ridiculous theme song to try and chart out, and both the intro and outro, it sounds like the record needle skips, because there's just these two hard cuts, one in each, where it just loops back, and it doesn't sound like the live band did that. So that's the most relevant and interesting that series remains for me. And in all honesty, if they want to reboot it again like they did with the Bumblebee movie, cool, sure. Make them look like they used to. Less Michael Bay and more yellow, and I think we'll be fine.
Yeah.
But then they have Mr. Potato Head. How many kids have a Mr. Potato Head?
Right. Do they still make those?
I think so. They make a Mr. and a Mrs. Maybe they make a little Spud. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay.
I think when the Toy Story movie franchise times out, Mr. Potato Head might time out as well.
Probably, yeah. And tragic.
There was the one last statement that you did want to touch on. So, quoting directly again from the article, specifically to Hasbro's late-breaking announcement that no matter how bright the future appears, in the third quarter of 2022, it's looking at a likely 15% decline in year-over-year sales. And for the year, only flat to negative sales growth. Right?
Yeah.
So that's across the entire org. That is, with WotC included, 15% decline in year-over-year sales. And for the year, only flat negative sales growth. So
Yeah, and this is something that, like, to me, this is important because Wizard Solo has weathered plenty of economic turmoil.
Mm-hmm.
Early 2000s, there was a lot going on. The economy took a giant dump and then recovered. You know what was still doing fine then? Magic.
Yeah.
It can weather this. My issue with this is I don't believe in Hasbro's ability to let WotC weather this. And that is, like, why I'm like,
Yeah.
a little bit hesitant.
Yep, we know that they like to move. They like to treat WotC like a slush fund, and those profits go to buy things for the other parts of the organization. The major question I have is that discusses sales. Sales is discussed in the investor call. Links to those numbers, you can pull it out. But I don't know when you look at entertainment what they consider a sale.
Yeah.
We just mentioned we keep harping on the frickin' movie studio, but beyond that, streaming numbers are weird. And I know the My Little Pony IP used to be on Netflix, so I don't know what happens there. I don't know how royalties work from there. I don't know if those are considered sales. And so if entertainment isn't plugged into that, maybe that number is better or worse than it could be because entertainment has the largest negative change between all three divisions that we're looking at. And so there is still a little bit of a fuzz on these numbers, but it's definitely something to look at. And if I had to set an expectation for Q3 2023, I would imagine that the entertainment division just continues to shrink into nothingness. I don't know, aside from the IPs that they own, that are cartoon based, I don't know what the entertainment division can do to sustain itself. So just shrinking out to make a My Little Pony video every now and again, or some Transformers thing that they kick to Netflix seems fine.
Yeah.
Or maybe they find out that actually partnering with somebody instead is the way to go and let somebody else handle it. Somebody with a
clue.
Well, I was going to say the personnel, but yeah, that is...
Yeah.
That is just a nice
The
way
most
of
important
saying,
thing in business is hiring people that know what they're doing.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. You don't want to have to build that from the ground up. So,
yeah.
I believe that is it for the investor call. There's a lot more in this document that we did want to go over, but it's going to begin to bridge into the episode that we're going to be doing next week, which is the What If We Ran Hasbro episode. So we will be coming back to touch on a lot of the other charts in this article, because that is, for me at least, a lot of where change would happen. Spoiler alert. So
yeah.
While it is good to look at this, they are fairly nebulous to talk about on this investor call when we are just looking at WotC itself, and the rest of these line items are just a lot of negative numbers.
Yep.
So, ready for picks?
Let's do it.
Right.
I went first last week. You're this week.
That is exactly correct. So, my pick this week has been sitting on my list for almost a year, or about a week off from that. And it is Whip of Erebos from Theros. So we're looking at the original artifact. We are not looking at the game day promo or whatever it is. So Whip of Erebos, if you don't know, it's a legendary enchantment artifact from the original Theros block. It costs 2 and 2 black. And it just says creatures you control have lifelink for a static ability. That's pretty neat. Then the activated ability of 2 and double black. Tap, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste. Exile it at the beginning of the next end step. If it would leave the battlefield, exile it instead of putting it anywhere else. Activate this ability only anytime you could cast a sorcery. Now that last line is very important. And it was very important if you ever played that card in the pre-release, because a lot of people didn't read all that text. And that was fun as a judge to remind people. But that last little bit doesn't make a difference. What is interesting about this is that if you have a creature that exiles itself or does something when it leaves the battlefield, like Obzedat, Ghost Council, or whatever it is from Gatecrash, as the owner of both permanents, you get to determine where Obzedat goes. So you would just whip Obzedat back into play and then send Obzedat out of play to its own ability and then bring it back in. So effectively you were reanimating Obzedat on the cheap. And that's not really something that's going on much with the card anymore, but it is like a cute interaction that you can look for overall. Not really anything that I think plays into the interest of this card, but just something fun to note. Now, I'll bring the stocks graph back up, and as we can see, it is a very slow gainer, and then we get to Eldraine and Theros Beyond Death, and if we notice, it spikes and holds there for a while, and that spike is most likely going to be because we found out that the god we were getting new gods in Theros, or no, we got the same gods in a different format, and we were not getting their weapons. Or if we were getting their weapons, they weren't the same. So we knew this wasn't coming back, so people just jump in on it. Now, a year ago, Card Kingdom is buying 144 at $4.40. There are 136 unique prices on TCG Player for a stark $6.66. Now, Card Kingdom is buying, as of this moment, 87 for $6.60. And the foil, there are 7 copies on... Card Kingdom is buying 7 for $8.40, which is not the greatest split. On TCG, there are 155 unique listings at $9.51. So we can basically see an increase in everything besides the Card Kingdom buy quantity. That has gone down. When I wrote my notes, Card Kingdom was buying 90, which is an increase of 3 from the current quantity, for $7.50, which is $1 more. So in a handful of days, 3 were sold, and the price dropped by $1, which I don't quite understand, but I don't think it matters for this card.
Yeah.
Now, when we look at Commander itself, within Commander, Whip is played in decks that want to go really a bit longer. It's not necessarily a combo piece, but rather a bridge to the late game, because that Obsidian roundabout thing, that's not a game-winning combo. That is a game-sustaining interaction.
Yep.
You're not using that to nug a table out for 2 every end step. That is a very long game to do that with. So we are looking at decks that go long. And we see that when we take a look at Rec, and we see these generals. And it's just like, all right, the new one is Mortarion and Be'lakor from Warhammer, and Gix, who isn't even released in paper yet from Brothers War. But then after that, it's Erebos himself, Belzenak, sure. Graven is interesting. That is kind of a combo general, because you just generally want to like dismember 6 times on your turn and kill somebody. And then we just go longer and longer and longer. Tiamat, Naomi, Obnixilis, and you just have these long slog generals. Now, more specifically, these aren't quite mono black control style decks, but they are more value style decks when you start reading through all those generals. They just want to play this really... They want to play as much Magic as possible in a given game. Terrible. Except for Obeka. Obeka is a combo general, and Obeka does obscure the stats a little bit. So I'll put an asterisk on all of this, and that asterisk is Obeka. Now, even within the options for longer game commanders, you see a distinct lack of these salty options. New Braids is not there. New Sheoldred is not there. Tegrid, God of Fright, is not there. Toxrill is not there. These group slug generals are not here. Nope. The players that look at Whip aren't looking to slog down a game, but just play a longer game. More Magic. And so that bridges us to the next point about this. I think this is an Invisibles card as well. I really think this card has Invisibles appeal. Because according to stocks, this is only in 36,000 decks out of a possible 900,000 that it could be in. And this isn't a completely overpowering card. It plays well at the kitchen table and can be a win con via recursion of similar late game threats between Commander and kitchen table. And it's this that I think speaks to the delta between the price point and adoption rate on Rec. The people that are truly interested in this card are people that do not self-report to sites like Rec. Now, timeline, based on recent sales trend and the ability to immediately arbitrage a decent quantity of these across multiple platforms, I expect that if we are able to buy in now, that we'll be able to get out for profit to buy a list within the next few months, 3 to 6-ish. The current upward trend in price does seem to be related to renewed demand, and we will see that on Rec with the 2 generals from 40k and Gix from Brothers War. Just new set generals, putting a little more pressure on this. So as demand renews, the fairly reliable, though slow velocity picks up, supply drains, and we continue our journey towards zero quantity. While it will take a fair amount of time to drain the open market to zero, there are several stepwise prices along the way that represent profit if we buy in now. So like I said, this has a market of 950, so it's going to be like 11, then 13. That's the kind of stepwise progress we're looking at. And this is slow. This sells like 100 or 200 unique a month. Yeah, it is kind of poop.
But that also harkens back to being an Invisibles card.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have that high visibility, high liquidity, because it's people that don't necessarily dedicate all of their time.
Yeah.
To
Also,
Magic the Gathering.
this is from the original Theros block. I'm bringing up this little nugget right now. When do you think that set was released?
God. 3 years ago?
9 years ago.
Oh my God.
September 2013.
Good Lord.
So we are almost a decade past that set. So population is just low based on time, right?
Yeah.
It's something I had in one of my drafts of this, but it did not survive. Like, we are a very long point out from this. And if you look at the temples, you'll see that they tank to like a quarter when they rotate. They flatten for a while, and then they spike up before their first like 2 reprints several core sets later. And it just was that time and commander pressure, right? And they needed a release valve, and we don't have it yet here. Reprint equity on this kind of card. I don't see it coming back in anything, because these didn't come back in Theros Beyond Death, and they weren't in the Warhammer decks.
No.
But
and we know next year we're not going back to Theros, so...
So it's got to be Universes Beyond at this point, and I don't think it's going to be the Balrog's Whip in LOTR, so I really don't know. I do not know. We just caught a Bident reprint, I think, in one of the Commander decks, and so sure, like, that makes sense. You just got to find the right spot for it. And this isn't a slow or clunky card by any means. It's just like Graveyard Recursion, and while WotC does do that from time to time, they like to kind of throw you more interesting and new cards for Graveyard Reanimation. There was a Graveyard... the Black Miracle is a Reanimator spell that came in a Commander deck. We just got that land from the Warhammer decks. Like, they seem remiss to reprint Reanimation effects in Commander decks when they can just make something better as an option. So, and that's fine, by all means.
Yeah.
By quantity, I have, like Temples and the regular gods, infinity of these, because I was just vacuuming up those 3. Commander had just really started to take off locally and in general. We were like 2 years removed from the first Commander set. I think we might be at the second Commander set, maybe a year out from the second set of Commander decks. And all of these, the temples, the weapons, and the gods just represented something entirely unique. But enough about me. I would recommend 2 to 3 play sets of this card, honestly, and I know that's kind of steep based on the current price point, but you'll be able to trade out at least 1 play set for profit soon, and the longer you wait, the closer you'll get to the black, and then the rest can be sold for just gas, for just pure profit after that. So for me, my number to get in if I had 0 would probably be closer to the 3 play set, and then number, so that's 12, and I would probably keep 6 scattered across a binder, just so they weren't glutted, and that would allow me to easily just arbitrage these, quote unquote, arbitrage out of my binder. We are 9 years removed from this set. You're not seeing a lot of this stuff in binders anymore, and so I think it carries that little bit of appeal.
Yeah. I think the other thing here that's really important is, this harken, this highlights the point that we always make, that the Invisibles, your kitchen table players, are so important, because this is something that kind of plays with the progression of a player, right? When you mention the EDH right generals, you have casual generals, you have like 75% generals, you have battle cruiser generals, and then you have an actual like CEDH level general. So this is something that can follow a player throughout their career as a player.
Oh yeah, that's a very good point.
So it's got a lot of liquidity, because it doesn't just have to go to the Invisibles, though those kinds of people love this card. It can go to someone at any level of play that just wants to do ETB shenanigans. The other thing is, and this is something we talk about a lot, is more and more design has gotten pushed to really efficient creatures that do impactful things when they enter the battlefield. So anything that interacts with that is just good.
Yes.
Because it's only going to get better with time, similar to Collected Company, which at this point, I just don't think it's ever going to get printed again because of how toxic that standard environment was. But
yeah,
I think it's super solid. I like it a lot.
The one thing that surprised me the most was when I was looking down that general list, and I did not see any of those like very punishing generals on the list. I really thought a general that is interested in just slogging down a game and just playing Grave Pact and Dictate of Erebos and as many like 1-for-1 effects like that where you can just recur threats and make the board groan, would play this card. It would show up here because it's a reanimation effect, and who cares if the second time you exile it, like, cool,
right?
You just Grey Merchant somebody out of the game, and I'm sure that's a high synergy card. I just haven't looked yet. Yep, there it is. Like, and it was like that. That's what got me, where I just realized that I was finally, for the first time in a very long time, dealing with a card that was mainly, I believe, an Invisibles card.
Yeah,
it's cool. It's interesting to see something like that, and then like watch the price trend go and like see continued interest in this card in such a way that it's just like truly organic demand, and it's just like never.
It's just awesome.
Yeah, never gonna stop.
Yeah.
Can't stop the rock. All right.
He's got a new show about being young, so you certainly can't stop him. Something else you can't stop is the constant surge of promotional cards that Wizards of the Coast is jamming down our throats. I think this is a good thing. I also think it is a very lazy way for them to try to make things up to an LGS for how badly they are dumpstering everybody.
Yes.
But I digress. At any point, my pick this week is one of those promos that is being jammed down our throats, and that is the new Windfall. So for those of you that don't know, obviously we're doing every year, for every year of Magic's history, there will be a promo. And for, I believe it's 1998, we are getting Windfall. Now, why this is important is because this is an old border foil. This card only has one foil printing ever, and it's in a Masters set. Now, if you look at the stocks graph for the Iconic Masters one, there's a few things to note here. One, the price it's currently at. Our foils are sitting at around $25. Also bear in mind, there was a foil card in every single pack of Iconic Masters. Now, without giving too much away, I can tell you definitively that most stores only received 4 packs of Windfalls with 8 Windfalls in each of them. So that means that most LGSs only have 32 copies of this card to give out to all of the players at their pre-release events. So the promo version is going to have a significantly lower level of availability than what the Iconic Masters one has. Now, go back to last pre-release. If any of you paid attention to the prices, the Findornels is the example I'll use. It was $40 at the pre-release. They're $2 now. That's not going to happen with this card.
No.
Because this card is all over EDH.
Yeah.
Every level. Similar from casual all the way up to CEDH.
Yeah. This
card follows you your entire EDH career. This is something that I would expect for the next couple weeks after the pre-release, because this episode will go live after the pre-release.
Yes.
That for the first couple of episodes after that, you will be able to trade it out fairly easily, I would think. And while doing so, I would say pick up as many as you can, because if the much more highly printed version that is also less desirable because it's new border
Yep.
is worth $25, this promo one
Yeah.
could easily hit the $40 to $50 price range, no problem.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I think we're hitting like a big opportunity, because until this market settles, I think there's a lot of opportunity. Just trade it out for stuff. I got the new cards you want from the set. Give me that promo.
Mm-hmm.
Let's make a deal. Let's get it done. Now, as far as quantity goes, I'm picking up everything I can.
Okay.
I don't care. I'll pick it all up.
Yep.
In terms of timeline, again, looking at the stocks graph, it's very interesting because you see it sit at $7 forever.
Yeah.
And then there is a massive spike in February of 2020. And then it craters back down. And then we hit this floor, another spike, floor. And now we're kind of hitting a floor. So what I expect to happen is this price is going to tank for a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And then in about 6 to 8 months, you'll start to see a little bit of growth. During that time, there's no way this doesn't have an insane level of liquidity. Just absolutely nutter butters. Because, again, this card is very good. Just is. And it's super liquid,
Yep.
super desirable. So if you need to get out of it
Mm-hmm.
to pivot into something else, you'll absolutely be able to. In the meantime, I'm going to pick up all of them that I can for sub $30. Because with this being as limited as it is, I just don't see a world where it's not worth, absurd amounts of money.
Yeah.
It's just going to be. But that's my thoughts on it. I think it's great. It's going to be insane.
Yeah. I keep forgetting about these promos because they were... I didn't look at them all, and I was like, oh, they're mostly duds. Lord of Atlantis is cute. If you don't have any of the other promo versions of it, like, it's unique art.
Yeah.
And I think... And I was like, oh, now that you brought this up, and I see Windfall, I just realized it's the only old border foil printing. The only thing I can think of is like seeing a foil gush in a case not too long ago for like $100 and some odd, but it's like,
Right.
This is not
like that card's restricted and it's still that much.
Yeah, and it's just like, is that where we go with this? Do we go even further than you think we're going to go with this card? Because it is an old border foil. It is highly playable across all echelons of Commander. It doesn't have the vintage playability, obviously, that Gush does, but it is the only old border foil of this card. It helps reinvigorate interest in this card, because the last time we saw it printed was, I guess, Commander Call Time.
Yeah.
So it pushes back up on this. And I think it's as though it's not a tournament staple, there's just this kind of like luster on this.
Yeah.
And these types of cards from this promo series in general that I think I don't value properly, and is always worth a good look.
I do want to say that while I think a lot of these are good, this is, I think, the best one of what we've seen so far. Because going back to quantity, another good one would have been the old border foil Chinese loyal retainers. But guess what? Shops only got 2 of those. 2 for a whole pre-release weekend.
Yeah.
So you know what most shops did? They just gave them to their employees who bought them from the store. Like that.
Yeah.
And it's, this is one that hits it like that good quantity, really good playability that I think is like a prime target to pick up. It's just so good.
Yeah. It's really hard to come up with a lot to anything to say that you didn't already cover, except for the fact that the people who curate old school foil cubes keep ironically getting more cards to put into that fucking cube.
Right. Great.
So, this is an easy look. I think the hardest thing about picking this up is going to be prying them out of people's hands once you find them.
Yeah.
I was also thinking about, as you were talking about this, thinking about the Fin Hornells, because I vended the DMU pre-release, and nobody brought me Fin Hornells, but that doesn't mean people didn't have them. They might just not have cared to offer them because they were more interested in just churning what they got in their pre-release kits. To me, while I was there.
Well, and one of the interesting things too that I found was, at my shop, we didn't get any of those promos until a couple weeks later.
Oh, that could have been what it was too.
People just didn't want to get rid of them at the event because they were like, "Oh, this is so cool." And specifically with the Findorn elves, a lot of people just wanted a playset.
Yep. Okay.
Especially as an Invisibles card, it's just an elf.
Exactly. It's just yet another elf that goes in the deck. So
yeah.
I like Windfall. I always like Windfall. I'm remiss that I keep not finding my Windfalls.
They're in a box somewhere. I'll find them one day.
I'm looking at the reprint sets. I'm like, I have this commander set and this one and this one and this
right.
one and this one. I'm like, where are all my Windfalls?
Yeah.
I need them. I actually need them to play.
Yeah.
That's really it. Unless you got anything else, though, I think that's it for this week.
Nope, I am good to go, my good chum.
All right. So for at MtG Cabalcast on Twitter, Facebook, Patreon, and YouTube, I am at Halt I Am Reptar. You are
at Thirsty Sizzler.
And we'll see you next week.